now. So Kelli, thanks for taking this on for us tonight. We're interested to hear more, always interested to hear more about the family and things going on around the family and history. So if you want to just go ahead and check in and then introduce your topic, go ahead. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Mom and sisters, for being here, and hubby for being here. And thank you, kids, for being here too. My name is Kelli. I am the oldest daughter of Miffy and Bill Decker. My mom is the daughter of Roy Gilmore, who is the son of Lucy West Gilmore, who is the daughter of Frank West, who is the son of Big Spotted Horse. So Lucy West's dad died when she was very young. And so her mother remarried Echo Hawk. And so that's the connection. She was raised by the Echo Hawk family. And my grandpa used to talk about Uncle Crip and Hobe, and he said they were my cousins. So I am happy to be here. I'm going to share my screen now and let's get started. Okay. Touch your nose if you can see my screen. So this picture hung in my grandma and grandpa's house ever since I can remember. We were told his name was Big Spotted Horse, and this was the story that we heard for years. Grandpa would say, Big Spotted Horse was big, really big. He was the equivalent of 7 feet tall. And he was kind of ornery at times, but he was always nice to his wife and kids. But you know, it was Big Spotted Horse that convinced the tribe to move from Nebraska to Oklahoma. Yeah, it was him. The chiefs didn't want to move, but he could see that things were going bad. And he thought it would be best if they just moved down to Indian territory. And so it was because of him that they moved. And they went to Washington, D.C. and they wined and dined him. And at this point, Mom would usually chirp in and say, it was the perfect retirement plan. You can move, get a house, a check every year. They'll supply you with food and tools. What could possibly go wrong? So Big Spotted Horse was all in for it. And so he did. He convinced the tribe to move to Oklahoma. But you know what? It didn't quite work out the way that he was told it was going to work out. So he was disgraced. And he was a bit scorned, and he left. He left the Oklahoma reservation, and they never heard from him again. Now that's the story we all heard growing up. And I've always been interested in family history, but about 5 years ago, I became an empty nester and decided to really dive in and find out more about this man that we have always heard about. And I've learned a lot about him, learned where he fit in our family tree. And yet there was something, it was about 2 or 3 months ago, there was something missing, some big piece that I just wasn't getting. There was more to this man, and I wasn't finding it. And so I dug deeper, and I went back to this picture, and I found it online. It's everywhere online. But on one place it said Big Spotted Horse, Grand Okmulgee Council, 1874 or 1875. And I thought, I didn't even know how to pronounce the name Okmulgee. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right now, but what was that? Never heard of it, never heard it before. So I thought, well, if he was there, it must have been something important. So I started diving in, and there's not a lot out there about this Grand Okmulgee Council. But I was able to find, and I had to buy some books, and I had to, talk to some libraries, but I was finally able to figure out what it was and what his role in it was, what was going on, and what was going on with the tribe at the time. So as I was going back, it's like, oh, this goes back to post-Civil War era during the Reconstruction era. And so I'd look at that a little bit, and it's like, oh, no, it goes back to it goes back before. I had to go all the way back to the 1800s to the beginning of this story. So bear with me. Some of you who are better historians than I will already know this, but it was the jumping off point for understanding what was going on at the time. So North America in 1800, it's kind of sliced and diced. We've got England, Britain, Great Britain there, King George III, who had bouts of insanity. He died blind and deaf and insane, but he was the ruler of this northern part. Then we have King Carlos of Spain, who has all of Central America, most of South America, and part of North America. But he wasn't really doing anything with it, especially that middle part called Louisiana. It'd been under his name for about 30 years, but he wasn't really doing anything. And then we had President John Adams, who was the president of the brand spanking new United States. So these were the big three players on the continent. But on the other continent, across the puddle, in Europe, we have another player, Napoleon Bonaparte. And he or his family ruled a big chunk of Europe. We've got him in red. We've got his stepson in orange. We've got his stepfather and his stepson's father-in-law in pink and yellow. He had a grand empire, but he wasn't satisfied. He wanted a piece of North America. North America was where it was all happening. So he really wanted a piece of North America. Now, this middle section called Louisiana used to belong to France, but they gave it to Spain. So he's like, I think I want it back. So in 1800, he talks with the Spanish king and they make a deal, and it's a secret deal. They don't announce it. They don't put it in the papers. It's really under the tail, where Spain just gives France back, or gives Louisiana back to France. Another thing that happens in 1800 is that President Adams' vice president runs against him in the elections and wins. So we have a new president, Thomas Jefferson. And he is all for expansion, civilization, expansion. Let's strengthen this country. Now, the problem with this Louisiana purchase is the city of New Orleans, the port of New Orleans, and the Mississippi River. Up until this point, remember, Spain wasn't really doing anything with it. So the United States had free travel up and down the Mississippi. They could transport their goods, they could transport people without taxes or tariffs or anything. And they could store their goods in the port of Louisiana, and ship them out again without any taxes or tariffs, if I'm understanding correctly. When France takes hold, they start imposing a few taxes here, a few tariffs there, and then more, and then it became burdensome. And even for a while, they shut down the port of New Orleans to the United States. And this was a real problem. So President Jefferson sends his envoy, Robert Livingston, to France and says, hey, we've got to have access to the Mississippi River. We've got to have access to the port of Louisiana. Go talk to France and see if we can purchase access rights. He wasn't having very much luck. And so James Monroe, future president of the United States, joins him. And these two have a budget of $10 million to purchase access rights to the Mississippi River and the port of Louisiana. What they didn't know was that Napoleon's advisors were advising him, saying, you know, you're kind of stretched thin here. You've got enough to deal with here in Europe. I mean, if you're going to get, if you want to build up your kingdom in the North American continent, you're going to have to build forts. You're going to have to send, people and soldiers, and we really don't have those funds right now. So they were advising him to get rid of Louisiana. So when James Monroe and Robert Livingston approached him and said, hey, we are interested in purchasing water rights, travel rights from the Mississippi River to the port of Louisiana, France turned around and said, how would you like to buy the whole thing? For $15 million. So Monroe and Livingston did not have authorization for $15 million. They only had authorization for $10 million, but they just could not pass up the deal. So they bought it. And that was the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. So that solved one of America's United States problems, was the Mississippi River and the port of Louisiana. It also had the potential to solve another one of their problems, which was the Indian problem. Thomas Jefferson really wanted to expand his borders. He really wanted to build cities and railways and just be a modern city. But there were these other people there that they called Indians, and they were just getting in the way, and they didn't want to move. Gold was discovered on Cherokee land, but Cherokee weren't that terribly interested in it. Cotton grew very well in Choctaw land, but the Choctaw people weren't that interested in growing cotton, and they didn't want to sell their land to people who were interested in growing cotton. Runaway slaves from Georgia and the Carolinas were down in Florida with the Seminole people, and the Seminoles were just fine to have them down there and wouldn't give them back. There was all this fertile farmland that was not being farmed. It was not being used to its fullest potential. The Indians were dangerous, and they were just standing in the way of progress. So Thomas Jefferson conceived of the idea of moving them. Since they hadn't been able to kill them all off yet, much as they tried, they thought, okay, we're going to move them. And so it was Jefferson's original idea. Madison continued this idea, and Jackson put this idea into action. In the year 1830, the Indian Removal Act was passed. And at its very, very basic, it said that they would exchange ancestral land of the Indians for the land west of the Mississippi that was going to be called Indian Territory. Now, this Indian Territory started out as being all the land west of the Mississippi, except for anything that was already a state or a territory. So it was big. There was plenty of room for the Indians over there. They could have all of that because, as everybody knew, it was called the American Desert over there. And, you know, the whites didn't want it. So the Indians could have it, and they could live over there. Whites could live on the East Coast side, and it would be just fine. And they promised the Indians food, supplies, and money. Not only that, they were going to give them agents to take care of them so they could learn how to be successful in their new home. In the year 1830, after this Indian Removal Act was passed by a mere 6 votes in Congress, mind you, the Choctaw were the very first ones who got removed. They were followed by the Chickasaw, followed by the Creek, followed by the Cherokee, who were eventually followed by the Seminole. The Seminole put up the biggest fight. There were 3 Seminole wars, but they eventually were moved too. And the trail that these 5 tribes, known as the 5 civilized tribes, walked was known as the Trail of Tears. And very shortly after that, Indian Territory drastically reduced in size. Fast forward to the Civil War. So once again, America is sliced and diced. We've got the United States of America, known as the Union, and we've got the Confederate States. And as the Confederate moved into Indian Territory, they were winning the battles. And so eventually the Secretary of War, Simon Cameron, ordered all the posts in Indian Territory abandoned. That would free up the military resources for use against the Confederacy, but that leaves all these posts open to invasion by the Confederates. Well, the Confederate States of America, the CSA, they needed and wanted the alliances of the tribe. They wanted this state to be a slave state, a Confederate state. And they didn't want to be fighting 2 battles, one with the Indian and one with the Union. So they wanted alliances. And the tribes, since all of their agents just packed up and left, they were very, very concerned about their economic welfare. And they were ticked off at the Union right now for some of the things that were being said in Congress. Besides that, many of the tribes had one thing in common with the Confederate States of America, and that was slavery. So the Confederate President Davis, sent Albert Pike over to the tribes and told them they needed to create a treaty of friendship with all of these tribes, friendship and alliance. So within 6 months, he started in March and he went to the Creek Nation. Took him 3 months before the Creek signed the treaty, but they finally signed. And within 6 months, they had 9 treaties. The Cherokees were really hoping to stay neutral, but they could see where this was going. So they signed. Oops. So of course, what was in the treaties was, number 1, sever all relationships with the United States of America and be accepted into the Confederate States of America. Well, the tribes had learned a thing or two about treaties, so they had a few of their own stipulations. 1, if the Confederate States were going to replace the United States, they wanted the Confederate States to fulfill all the treaty agreements of the United States. Albert Pike was authorized to do that. No problem. Yes, we can do that. Well, the tribes also said, we want representation in Congress. We want a promise of statehood. Albert Pike was not authorized to agree to those, but he really wanted these treaties. And so he said, okay, we'll do that. And to sweeten the pot, we will allow those tribes who currently have slaves to continue holding their slaves. Well, how did this go? Well, by the end of 1862, they absolutely could not fulfill the treaty agreements of the United States. They were very strapped for cash and just couldn't do it. Well, in 1865, the Civil War ended, and we all know how it ended. So where does that leave the tribes? Well, the United States was quick to act. They called a big meeting at Fort Smith, and the 5 civilized tribes were invited. And they drafted new treaties. One thing that United States wanted to make perfectly clear was that because these Indian tribes had entered into treaties of alliance with the late Confederate government, they had therefore forfeited all of their old rights of consideration and protection from the government of the United States, and that their property was now subject to confiscation. Also, it is now the policy of the government, unless other arrangements be made, that all the nations and tribes in Indian Territory be formed into one consolidated government. This was 1865. And part of that is they had to meet yearly to create their constitution, to create their Congress, to create their legislative branches and their judicial branches and everything. It was to be patterned after the United States, but it was to be their government. Well, the 5 civilized tribes, they kind of dragged their feet for a while. And the United States government was like, come on, you need to start meeting. So in 1870, they finally did meet. And it was the 5 civilized tribes, except Choctaw didn't want to meet. So the Choctaw Nation didn't come. They weren't really happy about this. They were afraid of losing their autonomy. They were afraid of just all being lumped into one group called the Indians. They would no longer be known as the Cherokee Nation, the Choctaw Nation, the Seminole Nation. They would just be the Indians, and they didn't want that. But they didn't have much of a choice. And so between the years 1870 and 1875, they did meet. They did create a constitution. It was patterned after the Cherokee Constitution that had been created 40 years before. And they did create their House of Congress, their Congress, and they had representatives. They called them delegates from each tribe. They would get together, report how many people were in their tribe, where they were located, how many acres they had in cultivation, what were they growing, what animals were they raising, how was religion going in their tribe, how was education going in the tribe, how many schools did they have, how many children were attending school, how was their English ability coming. And then they took care of any business, any resolutions that they needed to send to Washington, D.C., anything coming from Washington, D.C. that they needed to take care of. It was taken care of at that time. So this went on for about 3 years. Things were going pretty good. And then Washington, D.C. said, okay, 5 civilized tribes, you need to reach out now to the wild tribes and invite them, because more natives, more Indians were joining the Indian Territory. And so all of the natives that were there needed to be a part of this council. So Big Spotted Horse was indeed there in 1874. Not only that, I found this wonderful picture of Roan Chief, roaming chief, walking chief, and today I heard Roan Horse. He was there too. And everything that I have read about Big Spotted Horse, Roan Chief was at his side every step of the way, every move they made together. So I was really happy to find an early picture of Roan Chief. I remember Grandpa saying how tall Big Spotted Horse was, and I couldn't help looking at the picture. We know that Roan Chief was very, very tall, anywhere between 6'2" and 7'2". He kept getting taller as the stories grew. But if you look at their legs, there are 2 stones under Roan Chief's foot, and there are no stones under Big Spotted Horse's foot. Roan chief is sitting on a blanket. Big spotted horse is not, but they look to be about the same size. And they're sitting in the same spot. These photographs were taken by two different photographers, slightly different angle, but the same spot. So if if they were indeed, upper 6 feet or 7 feet tall, then these two men would have been quite an imposing sight. So who is this man, Roan chief or roaming chief or walking chief? He went by several different names, and I would like to invite Roger at this time to tell us a little bit about this man and his names.
Well, that was a really interesting historical overview, Kelly. So thanks for delving into that and laying out a panoramic view of the background history. I'd like to invite Carolyn to chime in as she has thoughts along the way. I have been doing research on our family line and realized that it connected to Rome Chief's family. I'm going to just use that name for convenience. But I realized that there was a connection there a few years ago. And so what I'm going to lay out a little bit here is my best thinking that I can come to at this point, and maybe Carolyn, you can clarify or correct what I'm gonna lay out here. So I'm gonna go back to a man who was born during the 1770s. He was a Jawi. Some accounts say he had an Oto father. But he's mentioned in American records around 1820 under the name Long Hair. Now, those records also have his name in Pawnee, and so I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Let me give it a stab here. Tarari Kawa. Tarari Kawa. And when you look closely at this name, it refers to buffalo wool. There were certain ceremonies in which this buffalo wool was used. And so his name actually means something like airy with long buffalo wool. So that's the best I can do to try to figure out what his Pawnee name was. He was an important Jawi community leader at Saru, and he was a member of the prominent royal family among the Jawis. And so he was born, as I say, probably sometime during the mid 1770s. Their records are a little bit confusing about that, but that's what I would guess. Now, he had 3 children. One of those, the oldest, as I have concluded, was her name translates as decorates them with downy feathers. Now, she was born during the 1790s, early 1790s. She married a little Kitgaki named Bull Elk, also known as Blue Coat. They had a daughter. I think the name is pronounced Stapitawi. It means hanging goods woman. Hanging goods woman married a man named La Chape. He was French and Pawnee, maybe with some Arikare in there. La Chape was just closely associated with the Kitgaki. Okay, and so they were the parents of Chakaos, which I don't know what that name means. She married a man whose name is translated as Big Son, and they were the parents of Churix Ekoak, and that was my great grandmother. Churix and her sister married Ekoak, and that's where our family comes from. At least three of the branches come from that family line. Okay, so stepping back in time a little bit, this man who's known in American records as Long Hair, I said he had three children. He also had a name that he was known by among the French, and so various versions of that name appear in different records. And I'm not sure what that name means, but all the versions of it seem to point to a French term, Les Malines, which has various translations, some of them not very flattering, but others refer to a fox, to a wise man, and that sort of thing. Now, he was known in various records. He seemed to have gone by this name very often. So these are the two names that he went by. As I said, he had three children. His oldest daughter goes back, descends down to our family. He had another son. This son was born at the end of the 1790s, and he is known as Pitere Saru. Pitere Saru is mentioned in various records. He was very tall. And this son, I don't know much about his life, but we'll come back to him. There was also another daughter of Long Hair, Malene, something like that. And her name, I just have it in Pawnee. I don't know what it means, and I don't know how to pronounce it. I would say Stasa Teraru. She was born about 1800. Now, she was a mother of a son and a daughter. Her son took the name later in life of Pitere Saru, his uncle's name. And this Pitere Saru was born about 1823, and he had a sister. I think she was born a couple years later, a little bit younger. Again, I don't know how to pronounce her name. I'm just going to guess here. Steraru Wasura Waru. She was born about 1825. And she married a man. Again, I don't know how to pronounce the name, and I don't know what it means. Tikara Resut. And their son was Rome chief. He was born about 1851, sometime around then. Now, James R. Murray wrote that Rome chief's grandfather was a Gitgaki who married a Jawi. So I think that this Gitgaki might have been the unnamed husband of his mother's father. So that's just my guess. And so he was a Gitgaki. There's not named in this genealogy. But that could be the way that Rome Chief was related to Big Spotted Horse. A Big Spotted Horse was a Gitgaki. And so there's a potential genealogical connection that I haven't clarified, but it is logical. that Rome chief, the man known as Rome chief, and the man named Big Spotted Horse. I would debate with both of those names for both men, but it's arguable that they were related. So Milan, long hair, born during the 1770s, he died in 1852. His son, the very tall Pitere Saru, I'm guessing that by this time he might have had a different name. I think of him as Pitere Saru, the giant. He stepped aside from accepting the inherited leadership when his father died and handed it on instead to his sister's son, who took the name Pitere Saru. And so this is the genealogy as I've reconstructed it at this point. I wouldn't swear by all these details, but this is the best that I can come up with, given all the confusing and minimal information that I have. Anyways, that's the best that I can come up with.
That was amazing, Roger. Thank you. And I know that it gets tricky trying to untangle those family tree branches. So well done. It was interesting when I looked at the photo. Whoops, go back. I don't think I can go back, but when I looked at the photo of these two men, I always thought that Rome Chief and Big Spotted Horse were contemporaries. But looking at Rome Chief, he's quite a bit younger than Big Spotted Horse. And so my first thought was, I'll bet they're related. I'll bet they're more than just friends, political allies. I'll bet they're related. So that's very, very interesting to hear. Thank you. So let's take a look at who else came to these council meetings. In 1874, there were a couple of photographers there who went around and took quite a few photos. So it's interesting to see who's there. So we have a few Comanche here. We've got Cheevers and his two wives on the left. We've got Habenanaka and his wife in the middle, and then an unknown white man on the right who they suspect was probably an interpreter. And they're all camping. They come and they camped there for 10 days for this council meeting. We have Gray Eyes, and here's his camp, and he's Sac and Fox. And here's a Cheyenne camp, men and women, lots of tents and other coverings. Now, the government provided meals for them while they were there. There was a budget for meals, and the interpreters got paid for their services as well. Here's Chief Whirlwind and his wife from the Cheyenne Nation. And even George Washington was there from the Caddo or Caddo Nation. And he's got some visitors at his tent. We've got Wolf on the Hill and his wife on the left. And we've got Little Bear and his wife on the right. And they didn't identify which nation these people were from. As you've seen, there were many women and children that came. These are some Sac and Fox women and their babies still in cradle boards. I keep looking for Big Spotted Horse's wives. He married two sisters. The oldest was given the name Lizzie, and the youngest was given the name Ida. And so I keep hoping, since there were photographers taking photos of families and women and children, that someday I'll run into a photo of them, but I have not yet. So they had this new building. The Muskogee are very proud of this building. It had just been built a couple of years before. It had cost them $13,000. And the reason they were so proud of this building is that they paid for it entirely themselves. They had no government assistance building this building, and they were very proud of that. So they met in this building. They also met outside. In the minutes There was actually a request at one point that they go outside and do some of these proceedings outside. And so you'll see Mr. Ingalls, he's conducting a meeting outside under the trees. So we've got the list of delegates. We have the Cherokees, the Muskogees, and the Creeks, the Choctaws, the Seminoles, and way at the bottom in the right-hand pie, we've got the Pawnees. Who's that? I had never heard of that name, never seen that name. I put it out on Facebook, and a few of our historians just answered me right back. Big Spotted Horse was the Pawnee delegate. And I think it was Matt Reed who said, this has got to be the worst transliteration of Pawnee I have ever seen. So I don't know where they got Ese Dotores from his Pawnee name, Asawaki Huru, but it probably was translated through another native language. Roger actually looked into that and couldn't find it in Cherokee, but maybe it was another language, who knows. And they have the interpreters here. So often the interpreters are forgotten and not named, and yet they are critical to talks like this. So we have the interpreters, and Pawnee Bob was the interpreter for the Pawnees. Never heard of Pawnee Bob, heard of Pawnee Bill, but I'd never heard of Pawnee Bob. But he was interesting. Before this, there's a story in the newspaper about him and a group of cowboys, a small group of cowboys, but especially one cowboy by the name of Jim Kenyon. And these friends, I think there were 3 or 4 of them, decided that they were going to go out and they're going to go hunt a buffalo. So they found a buffalo. They just wanted one. They were out camping and they just wanted some dinner. So they found a herd of buffalo and they decided to shoot one. So they did. And they said as soon as that shot rang out, that every blade of grass turned into an Indian. The Pawnee were also out hunting buffalo, and they had completely surrounded this herd, and they were just hiding in the grass waiting for the signal. Well, as soon as that gun went off, of course, the buffalo start moving, and that was the unplanned signal for the Pawnee to start their attack on this herd of buffalo. So it was a successful hunt for the Pawnee, and Cowboy Jim and his buddies got their buffalo, so it was a good evening, and they camped in relative close proximity with each other. Well, the next day, Pawnee Bob is bored. So he picks himself out the biggest Indian of the bunch. I'm sorry, not Pawnee Bob. Jim, Cowboy Jim is bored. And so he picks out the tallest Indian of the bunch and challenges him to a foot race. Well, that Indian was Pawnee Bob, and he's standing there and he's got his blanket over his shoulder, and Jim knows that he's going to have to take his blanket off before he can run. So he jumps the gun. He's off. And the wagon way down there was the goal. That's where they had to run to. So he's running and running and running. He's like, I don't hear anybody behind me. I better turn around and see where that Indian is. So he turns around and looks, and Pawnee Bob is right at his heels with his blanket still thrown over his shoulder. He didn't bother to take it off. And he's just lumbering along. And so Jim thinks, oh, I better pick up speed. You know, that wagon's getting a little closer. So he's running. And just at the last minute, Pawnee Bob jumps and hightails over. And it says he jumped Jim and wins the race at the last minute. Well, Cowboy Jim was really mad. You cheated. And so he decides to challenge Pawnee Bob to a wrestling match. He wanted to wrestle with him. So Pawnee Bob was there with a couple of his friends, and there was an interpreter there that Pawnee Bob was using. Even though he spoke English, he didn't let the cowboy know that he spoke English. He was using this interpreter. So they were throwing each other around, and Pawnee Bob was starting to get the better of Cowboy Jim, and he gets mad. And so he says, you son of a... And as soon as he said that, Pawnee Bob grabbed Jim's hair, threw him on the floor, stood over him, pulled out his knife, brandished it in the air 3 times, and then from ear to ear, and then got off of him and went and stood on top of Jim's rifle. Well, Jim's laying there on the ground. He just knows he's going to die. He's looking around for blood, and he doesn't see any. His neck's just fine. And he realizes that Pawnee Bob had turned his knife and used the dull side from ear to ear. So Jim's cowboy friends are just laughing. And Jim's really mad now, really mad. So he jumps up, but then he happens to notice that Pawnee Bob is standing on top of his rifle. He still has his knife out. He's swinging his knife back and forth, and he has a wicked grin on his face. So Cowboy Jim thinks it might be a good idea to back down, and he does. But according to the newspaper, the obituary that I read for Jim Kenyon, his friends never let him forget the foot race that he lost to a Pawnee and the wrestling match that he lost to a Pawnee. So that's Pawnee Bob. Don't mess around with him. He is Big Spotted Horse and Rome Chief's interpreter. So it starts on May 4th. Stephen Foreman, the Cherokee, is the president. They call roll of all the tribal representatives. They appoint interpreters. It starts out with 6 interpreters, but by the end there's 11 interpreters. And the Honorable Wilburn Robinson was appointed doorkeeper. And that's all that they can get done on that first day. On the second day, they get a letter from the Honorable Enoch Hogue. He is the superintendent of Indian Affairs, notifying them that he's going to be a couple days late. An interpreter, Pawnee Bob, was appointed for the Pawnees. I guess he wasn't appointed the day before. They appoint a chaplain who prays every single morning. Committees are created. Big Spotted Horse is assigned to the Committee for International Relations, I'm sorry. And I'm assuming that Rome Chief went with him. And at that point, the entire day has gone by, and Rabbit Bunch, a Cherokee, motions to hear from the delegates tomorrow. And so on the next day, they call them the talk. The talks begin from each tribe. They're checking in, letting you know about where they are and how they're doing. So I want to go through a couple of these talks for you. I mean, there's 70 pages of this journal. And so of course, we're not going to go through all of the talks. We would be here for 10 days as well, but I want to read parts of a few of these talks so that you can get a feel for what's going on. So imagine yourself in the building or outside under the trees. You're listening to people speak. It goes through all these interpreters to get to English. Somebody's writing it down, and this is what they have to say. Oops, I think I just skipped. Oh, shoot. Can I go back? There we go. First one to speak, the very first one to speak is none other than Mr. Rabbit Bunch. He is a very well-known Cherokee. He became postmaster for their nation and was really encouraging the young people to get an English education, but he himself never learned English till his dying day. He only spoke Cherokee. I shall say a few words concerning the condition of the Cherokees. The Cherokees pay a great deal of attention to the cultivation of corn, wheat, potatoes, and all other products of the farm. They raise enough for their own use and some to sell. I suppose they have 70,000 acres of land in cultivation. As to the different kinds of meats we eat, I can say we raise cattle, hogs, and fowl. We raise more cattle than we need for our own use, because a great many are sold annually to cattle buyers who are constantly passing through the nation buying. We are able to make our own books, which are read also by many of our people. By reading our newspaper, the books we make, our people gain knowledge. As to our government, we are pleased with it, and all things considered, we live happy under it. Another person to speak was Samuel Grayson. You who know us best know that we are an agricultural and stock raising people, depending almost wholly upon our skill in these pursuits. Corn is the principal production of our farms, and the Muskogees have for many years raised a surplus of this staple, bartering the same at different points in the country for merchandise. But during this past winter, they had the satisfaction of seeing more considerable quantities shipped south by rail, while in the opposite direction have gone cattle and hogs, reared by the industry of the Muskogees. We believe the Muskogees are progressing and not retrograding. We believe that without disturbance of our present relations with the government of the U.S., we can and will make as rapid strides in advancement as that great and good government could desire. This one fact we do know, that the constant dread of the odious territorial measures threatened and advocated in Congress for the last 5 or 6 years has done as much injury to the cause of civilization in the Muskogee Nation as anything that has occurred since the late war. And the passage of either of those bills would send a death knell of the Muskogees. Thomas Cloud, Seminole. This past year, our country was visited by a severe drought that injured a great many of our crops. But notwithstanding that, we had about half crop of various grains planted. During the past year, they have built 2 churches and 1 schoolroom of stone. There are 5 district schools in operation. They have not been as well attended as formerly, arising from differences between the agent and the people employing teachers not satisfactory to the people. The generous prosperity of the nation is good, and if they can be left to enjoy their country themselves without interference by Congress, with its territorial bills and agitation of this question, we see no reason why they should not advance in all that tends to make a prosperous, contented, and happy people. Tito Ahunta is a Kichi. They are originally from Texas, so here I go. I am rejoiced to meet so many of my red brothers. I am also much pleased to hear of the prosperous condition of many of the tribes represented. I'll always endeavor to follow the advice of my brothers of this council. I am glad to say that we are trying to travel the same road. I do not intend ever to leave the road I am now trying to learn to travel. I will neither forget nor throw away the advice I have here received. And Dave of the Toa-Cunnies. We have met here to have a good talk. This is good. This is right. And I am glad I'm here to hear what is said. Many of you here are very smart men, and I feel that I am far behind all of you. But brothers, I have my ears wide open to hear all you have to say. Some of you look like white men, but you think you are Indians. You should forget this thought and go about setting good examples for such of your brothers as we are. Some Indians talk about their intentions of living like the white man, when probably they don't mean it. But I mean exactly what I say on this subject. Having planted 14 acres of corn last summer, I labored very hard. When dry weather came on, I lost all of my labor. Many an Indian would have become discouraged and quit, but I did not. I have made my farm as large again this year and have gone to work harder than ever I did before. My brothers, although I've started late, I'm going to work manfully. And if you are not careful, I'll catch some of you. When I left home some days ago, my young men were plowing. They are genuine Indians. For even when holding the plow, they are still painted and wear the flap, but they are working, and I am glad of it. Towards the end, Big Spotted Horse is given the opportunity to speak. And I would like to read all of his talk because it's really important to our Pawnee history. My brothers, I am glad to see the faces of so many of my red brothers here today. For this purpose, I came here. Many years ago, the Pawnees and the Wichitas lived together in this country, but have long since been divided. And it seems to me now that the Great Spirit is bringing all Indians together again. I do not know when my people lived here, but our old people tell us of it. They moved away from this country in those early days, and those who then lived have all passed away. I think that was a bad move. After living a while upon the present Pawnee Reserve, our old men, without informing us, sold the greater portion of the country, and we did not know of the fact till we found ourselves surrounded on all sides by white people. We now can scarcely move without disturbing some white person. If a Pawnee lays hand on a stick of wood or grass, the white man says, "Hold, this is mine." If a Pawnee's horse gets beyond the limits of his narrow reserve, he need not go look for him. We are surrounded up there on all sides by white men, and it seems that everything belongs to him. So I think I and my people will come here and surrender our part to him. Besides this, even the Sioux give us much trouble. Last summer, the Pawnees went on a buffalo hunt when they were surprised by these Sioux, and many women and children were killed. Years ago, when they used their own weapons of warfare, we could easily keep them at bay. But now, since the white man has armed them so well, we can no longer withstand their attacks. When in that country, I often tried to think of some means of bettering the condition of myself and people. When at last I remembered that it had been said that we had relatives and friends among the Wichitas of this territory. We therefore came to them, having nowhere else to go. They received us right away, in the right way, and now I have come to you, my brethren, in council assembled. What think you? I've come a long way in search of a home. Will you give me a home here? You can see that I am an Indian like yourselves, and I think you can well afford to allow me the privilege of coming with my people among you. I have come a long way to see you, and the privilege allowed me of talking with you makes me glad and my heart feel big. I think this council can fix up this matter to our satisfaction and hope it will give it due attention. We will not forget this kindness. Our children and your children will grow up together, and in after years, remember the deed with grateful and loving hearts. I desire that the superintendent also exert his influence on our behalf. We need subsistence immediately. I and my young men know something about plowing, and if allowed a reservation, we would go to work. This was taught the Pawnees long ago by the Great Spirit. I've had good advice since I've been here and have laid hold on it with no intention of leaving off. I've learned that this council is making a good road for all Indians to travel. I'll remember this and commend it to my people. I came here to learn and believe I have already learned much. I'm anxious to know before leaving what you and the superintendent will do for me and my people. I think it advisable that you advise the entire Pawnee people to move here and let the white man have all that country to himself. Gentlemen, you are all strangers to me, yet I love you like so many brothers. The very next day, Joe Scales of the Cherokee submitted a proposal to invite the Pawnee with open arms to the Indian Territory. Joseph Folsom, a Choctaw, also had an invitation. And from reading the minutes, it doesn't sound like one knew that the other one was writing an invitation. So Mr. Scales and Mr. Folsom had similar invitations, but they weren't quite the same. And so the minutes say that a great discussion ensued for the rest of the day about the Pawnee coming to Indian Territory and how that should happen. It was taken up again the next day. I'm sorry, not Sunday, but it was taken up on Monday after the business. And Joe Scales submitted a second draft. And then Mr. Folsom submitted a corrected draft. And still there was great discussion. I wish we knew what the talking points were. There's no hint. It just says a great discussion ensued. It doesn't seem to be that there was any issue of whether the Pawnees were welcome to come. It seems to be when and how that was going to happen. Wednesday, they're still talking about it, and it has taken up most of their time during these days. So finally, Mr. Scales has his final copy of his invitation, and Mr. Folsom has his final copy of the invitation, and they decide to take it to a vote. They explain what the yeas mean, they explain what the nays mean, Joseph Folsom got 25 votes and Mr. Scales got 36 votes. So his invitation stood. And this is what it said. Resolved by the General Council of the Indian Territory that Big Spotted Horse, chief of the Itzkaha band of Pawnees, be and he is hereby requested to convey to the Pawnee tribes of Indians the cordial sympathy and friendship of the nations and tribes represented in this council, and to assure them on behalf of the nations hereon represented that whenever they shall remove to and become legally resident in the Indian Territory, they will be received and treated as brothers in this council. Further resolved that the President, the Honorable E. Hogue, Superintendent of Indian Affairs, be requested to examine into their condition here and in the state of Nebraska, to afford them such immediate relief as may be possible, to make such recommendations to the general government of the United States, to render them such aid and assistance as in his judgment will be most conducive to their interest and early settlement in the Indian Territory, upon such terms and conditions as may be equally satisfactory to themselves and to the tribes among whom they may desire to settle. Resolve further that the secretary furnish Big Spotted Horse a copy of these resolutions with the names of the delegates and tribes of the General Council affixed. They did it. They did it. They got the official authority, permission, invitation, whatever it was they needed to officially allow their people to move from Nebraska to Oklahoma, Indian Territory. And we all know they did. It didn't happen in one fell swoop. It happened in waves. The first group came with Big Spotted Horse and Roan Chief in 1873. This last week, I just got 2 letters from the Oklahoma Historical Society. It was the agent, shoot, I just forgot his name, in Nebraska, writing to, and I have his name, I don't know who he's writing to, but he's writing a letter, and it's all about how yesterday Spotted Horse and his men took these people and they crossed the river. They're leaving, they're going to Indian Territory without permission. And then there's a letter the next day saying that we were able to bring some of them back, but they're camped out on an island in the river. They're not coming over. Spotted Horse is a determined leader. And yeah, it's really exciting. It's an 1873 handwriting, and there's some water damage. And so I haven't been able to go through and read everything, but it's about their initial move to Indian Territory. And that's really exciting. So they do make the move. And then it's 1875. Again, we have the council. This time they have different delegates. There's Good Chief, Sun Chief, Captain Chief, and Turselekon Waho. Looking up photographs, I don't know if these are the right men, but I was able to find a few. Maybe those who are better historians than I can shed some light. Good Chief, there seems to be this one photo that seems to be Good Chief. Sun Chief was a lot harder. There's several people by the name of Sun Chief. The man to the left was Sun Chief. He died shortly after the photograph was taken, and I don't know if he was even alive in 1875. The photo to the right, his name has been translated as Boss Son, but apparently he also was known as Sun Chief. So I don't know if it's either one of these men. I looked and looked and looked, could not find any record of a Captain Chief. The only captain that I'm familiar with is Captain Jim, but I have no idea if he was involved in this. And of course, I couldn't find any record of Turselekon Waho, but they were chiefs of the 4 bands of the Pawnee in 1875. So if I went back and found that information, I could positively identify them, but I ran out of time last night. Sun Chief speaks very early in this conference, and he says, "I come by this council to learn, not to speak. I am not much informed and hope to learn many good ways from my brothers by hearing what they have to say. I want to learn and be doing something. I understand what is said, and want to carry it to my people. So these, I had to get this book online. The 1875 journal of this council is not even available online. It's only available in book form. We have a talk here, and let's see, they call him running chief. And I wasn't sure that it was the same man, but in listening to what he has to say, it becomes obvious that it is the same man. So I just want to read a little bit to you here. He says, "At the outstart, I wish to return my thanks to the General Council for its exertions in behalf of my people and myself. Especially, I am grateful to those who at the last council fought my battles and passed the resolutions inviting my nation to become legally resident in the Indian Territory. They are here now. A good education will give our children the power and knowledge to act for our people and make them able to defend, along with you, our rights and our heritage. And I shall be proud of the day when our Pawnee boys, educated and grown men, shall take their place in council and be able to talk and communicate with you, and all without the use of an interpreter. Brothers, formerly the only way for a Pawnee chief to make his mark was to kill a good many of his enemies. Today, the only way is to become a great farmer, a great mechanic, or perhaps a great lawyer, as I understand some of my brothers to be. In conclusion, allow me to express my thanks for my privilege of being a member of your body, where I have learned the great lesson that all Indians are, or should be, brothers." The Wichita have a few things to say this year. "Brothers, I am sorry that I am not able to give as cheery an account from the Wichitas. We have met with misfortunes and have suffered a great deal since the last council. This trouble and suffering was caused by the Kiowas and Comanches camping near our village, and by their bad conduct involving themselves in a war with the United States troops. Many innocent people were killed, and my people, fearing they would be involved in a war, fled from their homes, in their haste and excitement, abandoning all their property but their horses. The Kiowas plundered our village, robbed us of all we had, burnt our schoolhouse, destroyed our crops that we had gathered and laid by for winter use, in a few hours, destroying all the results of our summer's work. We received word that the government had forwarded provisions for our winter supply, and although we were told repeatedly they were coming, they never came. And to make matters worse, the Pawnees from Nebraska, to a number of about 2,000, moved into our country and settled near the agency. Our situation was bad enough before, but with these hungry people added to our number, our situation became deplorable, and much suffering ensued." Big Spotted Horse has a few things to say. "I am very glad to come to this room where I see my brothers present. Brothers, I am very ignorant on account of my forefathers. I do not know anything about this civilized business. After growing to be a man, the people told me to go to work and plant and grow corn. I am very glad to hear what my brothers say. I have suffered much because I did not know how to work, but now I hope to do something. My red brothers, you know a great deal more than I do about working. I see a great many of you do a great deal of good for your tribe, and everybody that labors gets a good deal to live upon. Work is what God made us for. My brothers, I used to live away up in Nebraska, not a very good country. So I thought I would come down here to my brothers. I want to say something about plows. Superintendent, won't you help us? Won't you write to Washington right away and get us implements so we can go to work? I know I am a right young man. I can work and I will work. I have 4 boys. I will send them to school so they may learn to read and write. Every day, I don't know what to do. Every day, the children cry for something to eat. And if I go to work like my brothers, my children will always get something to eat. I never feel tired. I used to run about in every direction. I now want to work. I do not like to lie down all the time. Something always happens. It's not good. A man that works every day feels good. My brothers, you know I only follow the chief down. I am the man that caused the Pawnee to move down into this Indian territory. I brought them down, and I used to think that I was the head man. But now the chiefs have come down, and I am not the head man any longer. I am glad to come down to this room where my red brothers are. My brothers, I feel glad of one thing. We have plenty of timber all over the Indian territory. We have plenty of firewood. All my chiefs and all my tribe that came down the last time, they think this is a very nice country. When I was coming down here, the chiefs didn't want to come, but now they say they want to stay here forever. We have some children here. We want to learn them something good here in this country. Now, I want you to tell in Washington that the man named Spotted Horse wants some plows and he wants to go to work. I don't say that I will learn to read myself, but I will learn my children and I will go to work. Whenever you have a council again and the chiefs come down, I want to come down with them, and perhaps I will say something then. Brothers, you are saying such good things. If anyone here has a bad heart and a bad feeling, he ought to take his heart out and throw it away and get a better one. That's all. Towards the end of this conference, the four chiefs, it says that good chief, sun chief, captain, and Tudisiwe Lakomaho, the four chiefs of the Pawnee Nation speak. And I'm not going to read all of their talk, but I'm going to read some interesting parts. We, the four chiefs of the Pawnee Nation, desire to speak a few words to our brethren of other tribes. When we first grew to be men, we never thought anything about work. We let the women do all the work, and we sat down and sang or smoked. What the women cooked, we ate. And when the women planted, we did not take any care of the crop, but went off hunting. But God has helped us and made rain. And sometimes we would have everything we wanted in the fall of the year. But that way we found was not good. By and by, the president sent for chiefs, 3 chiefs and a soldier of each band, as he wanted to make a treaty with them. When we went to Washington, we saw how the white man worked and how he acted. And when we went back, we told our people. The president told us to go to work and not make the women work for us, that we were men and had hands and strength. And he also told us that if we would go to work, he would give us wagons, harnesses, plows, horses, cattle, and hogs. We did not get those, but we got money and goods. We got 30,000 each year. We drew 15,000 in goods and 15,000 in cash. The president told us too that he would send a man out and give us the wagons and the plows and to treat between us and the United States. And this man, our agent, we have not a word to say against him. When he told us to put our children in school, which we did. He told us to put our children in school, which we did. And now we have about 60 in school up in Nebraska, which have not yet been down here to their new home. We left 2 chiefs, a soldier, and an interpreter up there to take care of them. And when they are educated, they will all come down here together. When we were up in Nebraska, we did not get along very well, as the northern tribes would steal our horses and sometimes kill some of our men. Another thing, the white men were getting too thick up there and were taking our wood and other things. We would sometimes take and try the white man, but it did no good. So we thought we had better move down here among our brethren. Spotted Horse said that the chiefs were not willing to come down, but that he brought them down. His talk was very good, but that was not so. We wanted to come down, but we would not without authority from the government. And when they gave us permission, we were very glad to come. When Spotted Horse wanted to come, he asked the superintendent and agent, and they told him he might come with Running Chief and 1 other man. But he started with 300 Indians to come down here, and the agent had to send us to bring them all back. We are glad to hear Spotted Horse talk, and we hope he will do what he says he will do. But don't forget how this thing really was. There is no use for a man to get up and talk by guesswork. A man ought to know what he's talking about. We want the man that talks for us to talk about what our red brothers are talking about. That is civilization, education, and the way we ought to treat each other. So there was obviously some discord between the chiefs and Big Spotted Horse. And I suspected that, but it was really, really interesting to actually read that and read what was going on. Another thing that was going on, yeah, okay. The Wichitas speak, oh, sorry, 4 chiefs of the Pawnee, got ahead of myself. Another thing that what was big on their minds in 1875 was that the US government was trying to take their land title and put railroads across and an allotment and take even more of their land. And so they wrote a resolution and said, absolutely not. We have honored our treaties. We expect you to honor your treaties, which we all know they didn't. So this Indian state that they were promised, it didn't happen. And we all know it didn't happen. But my question was, what did happen? Not being raised in Oklahoma, I don't know Oklahoma state history. So I did a little research, and yeah, in 1889, after they took even more land from the natives there, they opened that up to the white settlers, known, the land rush. So the photo on the left is, I'm sorry, the photo on the right is 30 seconds before the noon bell. And the photo on the left is 30 seconds after the noon bell. So Oklahoma was divided. You had the Oklahoma Territory and Indian Territory. Oklahoma Territory was an official territory. Indian Territory was semi-official, wasn't as official as Oklahoma Territory. And then the big question was, they all want statehood. Were they going to request statehood as 2 states, or were they going to request 1 state? And so, the battle raged on 2 states, 1 states. And, there was differing opinions between the white settlers. There were different opinions even between the natives. And in the year 1907, Oklahoma was admitted to the Union as 1 state, with Charles Haskell as their first governor. The promised Indian state never happened. Indian Territory disappeared. And I had a real hard time not being mad about it. But what I have chosen to focus on are these 2 fine young men who took the initiative. They saw the needs of their people. It wasn't working in Nebraska. There has to be something we can do about it. And they did it. I believe that the chiefs and the agent were waiting around, I don't know how long they would have waited. Big Spotted Horse and Roan Chief were not willing to wait. They went down without permission from the agent, without permission from their chiefs. They went down to the Wichita, who had said, yes, you can stay with us. They presented themselves to the 1874 council and requested the permission that the chiefs needed in order to move legally into Indian Territory, brought that back to the chiefs, who then said, okay, now we can move. So I admire them and respect them for taking the initiative to do what they felt was best for them, for their families, and their people. And the best part of it all is Grandpa's stories were true. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kelly. That was great. Let's see. Can you all hear me? Okay. Well, thank you. That was very, very interesting. I have a couple of questions, and I imagine some other people have some questions and or comments. Let me. Are you open for that?
Absolutely.
And some feedback. So let me go
I
ahead.
love feedback. I would absolutely love feedback. Yes.
Yeah. Well, let me just open it up for that. Does anyone have something you'd like to add to this or ask about?
I think it would be interesting to talk a little bit more about Pawnee removal, what happened. But I want to make sure that our guest, Carolyn Ruwalk, has a chance to chime in at this point.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi. Well, I wanted to say, well, one, thank you for the beautiful presentation and this incredible historical lens of our history. And, Roger, you had mentioned that, you'd like to hear any of the research that I've done. Everything that Roger, that you presented on the genealogy of Rome chief goes way further back than I've been able to find myself. So I don't have anything to add on that end. But it's incredibly impressive what these two young men were able to do. And I'm thrilled to hear the stories. My journey in hearing and learning about our history and lineage has like just beginning to blossom. So I appreciate you including me in this meeting. And in the future, if there's anything that I uncover, I hope that I can share that with you as well. And if you ever need any maps made for anything, you can tap me as a resource. I'm a trained cartographer and geographer, so would love to be helpful if you need. Thank you. Wonderful.
I'm so glad you
Wonderful.
made it. I'm really happy that you could come tonight. It's nice to meet you face to face.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And Carolyn, I'm really intrigued with the map making. I've been doing a lot of research on Pawnee geography, and I've been working with a couple of groups of archaeologists who are doing, publishing projects of one kind or another. And I've seen their work on trying to put together maps of Pawnee land. But I may want to get in touch with you to see if there's a map that we could do using Pawnee terms for rivers and other features. So I hope you don't mind if I get in touch at some point in the future to see what we could do to put together a map of Pawnee named places in Pawnee land.
Oh yeah, that would be terrific. I would love that.
And I want to also point out the importance of Kelli's research in including the man known in her talk as Rome chief. Now he went by various names, and I think at that point in time, my impression is that the name he went by was Red Hawk. Now, I don't know that for sure, but that's the name that is associated with him during that time period. So the naming's issue is complex, and maybe another meeting we can sort through the names for Rome chief. But what she is saying here is that the first group of Pawnees who left under the leadership of Big Spotted Horse and Lone Chief and Frank White also included a young Rome chief. And so he was a part of that initial group that left Pawnee land. And I don't know, maybe it's even possible that he was part of the founding expedition that set forth at the end of 1872 to take a tour of Oklahoma and visit with the communities there and start the negotiations about removal. And what Kelli talked about with the initial movement of Big Spotted Horse, those guys went back to Nebraska after Massacre Canyon happened in August of 1873. They went back and they talked to their relatives and friends about moving south. And a group of them started south, but then they stopped and negotiated with the agent and with the leadership of the Pawnee Confederation Council. And then some of the members of that group turned back and rejoined the reservation. But then about 300 people slipped off in the night and headed south anyways. And it appears that Rome chief was a part of that group. They went south And in the first meeting that Kelly talked about, 1874, May 1874, if I got this correct, Kelly, the photos of Rome Chief and Big Spotted Horse were taken at that meeting, which means that Rome Chief was part of that first group that left and settled with the Wichitas. They were there in the spring of 1874. All the other Pawnees were still in Nebraska. But in the course of that year, various things happened. There was a grasshopper epidemic, and other things happened, continuing Sioux attacks on the reservation. And the Pawnees decided that they would start thinking seriously about moving south. And so the main group of the Pawnee Nation moved south in the fall of 1874. That's why they weren't at the 1874 meeting in Oklahoma. The main group went south in the fall of 1874, but not all of the Pawnees. Some of the Pawnees stayed behind in Nebraska. And so these guys went south and they joined the Wichitas at the end of 1874. And so in the 1875 meeting, Kelly, when you list the names of these various leaders, and I think the photos that you chose were good guesses, but I would choose different individuals to represent those names. And but by 1875, the Confederacy leadership, with the exception of the Skeetees, were there in the South. And so when they showed up at the 1875 meeting, that was the leadership of the three South Band, Akitaru, among the Pawnees. So pretty much the Pawnee Confederacy was present there officially, the leadership, except for the Skeetees, who were still in the north. And they moved down south in the fall of 1875. And so that's the general progression of what happened. Now, Kelly, I'm saying this is so impressive. I was totally unaware of these records. These are the first accounts of Pawnee removal that we have. And the story got settled in among later generations of Pawnees that the Pawnees were forced to remove from Nebraska by, various forces out there. And I've been arguing against that for a long time. But this affirms the idea that this was basically a strategy on the part of the informal, respected people to move south for reasons of their own reasons. And when the leadership decided, let's go south and join those people, they made their own decision. So it really does them an injustice to say that the Americans forced them to move south against their will. Now, the circumstances were a little more complex, as the testimonies that Kelly read attest. Conditions were not ideal in Nebraska with their new American neighbors. So there's a variety of factors to consider here. But for me, the basic thing that I've tried to say for years now without any success is to say that this move south was an effort to shape an internal policy procedure for guiding the future of the Pawnee people in ways that reflect their own agenda, their own wishes, their own empowerment. And that's what removal was all about. And that's the story that deserves to be told. And the papers that you found, Kelly, that's what they say. That's how I'm hearing this.
Yes, I was I was so excited to get this book, this little book. And in reading it, you've got the words of Big Spotted Horse. It's not a newspaper article reporting on it. It's his actual words. Yes, they've been translated, but they were translated by another Pawnee. And so I worked as an interpreter for years. And so I understand how interpreting can change things. And there are things in here that tell me this was an uncomfortable subject, or that interpreter's white. You know, I can almost pick out which interpreters are Caucasian and which interpreters are Native by the way that they interpret, which is why I wanted to go back and see who Pawnee Bob was. Was he Caucasian? Was he on the American side, or was he on the Pawnee side? He was a Pawnee. So the words that we have here, from Big Spotted Horse, I believe are pretty, really close to what he was trying to say. And when I read that, I cried. I did. Because, yeah, we get a glimpse into the man that we've just had these shards of stories handed down from generation to generation. And you're right, people do believe that we were forced, but that's never what we heard. That's never what we heard. And this, to me, it proved it. It proved it, that Big Spotted Horse and Roan Chief, like I said, took matters into their own hands and did what they felt was best for them, their families, and their people. And I don't know of another tribe that relocated voluntarily. I mean, truly voluntarily. They might be out there, but I haven't found them yet. So I think our history is unique. And I agree with you wholeheartedly, Roger. This story needs to be told. It needs to be told.
I would also say that Big Spotted Horse's comments, which deserve some analysis about vowing to Americanize, if that's an appropriate term to use. We should take that a little bit seriously, because right after he made those comments in the spring of 1874, he joined Richard Pratt's military expedition in the South as a scout. He and I think 16 other Pawnees joined. So I'm guessing these were all Pawnees who were part of the initial movement, the first group who left. That included the man we're calling Roan Chief. I don't know if he was a scout in 1874 or 75, but Big Spotted Horse was. He earned the respect and had a great relationship with the commanding officer, a man named Richard Pratt. Richard Pratt, soon after that, founded Carlisle Indian School. And Big Spotted Horse sent his son, your ancestor, Frank West, to that school just months before Big Spotted Horse was murdered in Kansas. And so he acted on his vow, let's educate, I'm gonna send my kids to school. They're gonna learn English. We're gonna tread a different kind of path here. So when he says that sort of thing, knowing that he sent his son to Carlisle under the tutelage of his former commanding officer, here's one thing I would point out. In Indian country today, Richard Pratt is demonized. He's hated. Big Spotted Horse was friends with him. And I think it was because of that friendship that he sent his son, Frank West, off to Carlisle boarding school, which was founded by Richard Pratt. I think he was a major or a colonel or something like that. I haven't studied that in detail. And so when other nations say Carlisle was awful, it was imposed, our children were forced to school, well, that I would not dismiss that entirely. Some of that has to be true. But in the case of Big Spotted Horse and many Pawnees, they trod a new path. And part of it was boarding schools, learning English, getting exposed to other ideas. This is what we want our kids to do. And Big Spotted Horse sort of led the way, sending Frank West, his son, off to Carlisle. So that's another thing I'm struck by, the narratives that exist in Pawnee land about we were forced to remove and then they came and stole our children. Those do not reflect the experience of the Pawnees of that time. They had their challenges. Things didn't go smoothly with their American neighbors. But I think the story that you're telling, Kelly, is really important because it matches with the research that I've conducted for years, saying to myself, okay, well, the Pawnees weren't forced from Nebraska. I've known that a long time. How come all the Pawnees say they were forced? Okay, well, the Pawnees, there's some documents. They sent their own kids off to boarding schools. How does that match with they were rounded up and herded off and chained to their, their dormitories and boarding school, and they hated it? Well, I think that the time is here to present a more nuanced kind of historical retrospective on what happened, because what is being left out of the stories told in Pawnee land today is the story of how the Pawnees really tried their best to empower themselves and make their own choices. And that is really important. And I think that's the part that needs to be told. And it can't be told as long as the Pawnees are victims of history rather than agents of their own destiny.
Thank you.
Kelly, this is Deb. One of the things that I draw from this is the part that you brought up about the shift of the women doing the agriculture, and how the men were willing to take that on and work. So that's a lot that I'm even dealing with. When bringing back this corn and getting people to work, and they're saying, well, that's women's work.
Mhm.
And I'm thankful that I have a couple men on crew that help us, because it is hard work, and I'm not no spring chicken either. But that was a good draw to hear that. I always appreciate it, all the help that the whole families tend to do in the gardening now. It's a good shift. We have a lot to do. But thank you for bringing this out and for the clarification, because I have been one of those folks that said that we were forced down here. I was just going by the shallow history that we had, and appreciate the depth that you and Roger have really brought to light. Thank you.
Thank you. When I read that part about the chiefs being willing to work and not let their women do all the planting and all the cooking, I actually thought of you.
I have a question. And thank you, Kelly. This was really interesting and thought-provoking. And certainly thank you, Roger, for all the research you've done. But what confuses me a bit about whether we were somewhat forcibly removed from our homelands in Nebraska to Indian Territory is many years later, the land claims, and it was settled. And we received compensation for our lands that were confiscated in Nebraska. How do we reconcile that? Have either of you looked at the documentation that was presented to the Indian land claims, whatever it was called at the time, that generated the final payment for the lands we lost in Nebraska?
Yes, there's a long history there. In the American judicial system, you can't sue the sovereign. But there was a court of claims that was set up a long time ago, I think. I'm not sure of the history of that. But the court of claims allowed exceptions for suits to proceed. And various communities, including the Pawnees, began to explore, well, what are our complaints? What injustices can be corrected through this procedure? And the Court of Claims did not prove an appropriate venue for this kind of work. So the Indian Court of Claims was set up. I'm not sure exactly when that was. I think during the around 1940 or so. And various communities decided they would develop and research cases to take before the ICC. And this includes the Otos and the Pawnees and many other communities. And the Pawnees, working with their lawyers and historians, they developed a series of itemized issues that they felt were injustices, extending back through the history of the Pawnee political relationship with the United States. And so I don't know how many instances of complaint there were. If I'm just guessing, it was 8 or 9 different issues that were put together by the Pawnee Nation and were brought before the ICC. And this took decades to pursue. And the findings were finally made. Now, one of the shortcomings in the ICC is that they only allowed monetary judgments. They did not allow for things like the return of land bases. And so the Pawnee case, the judgment that was made had to do with shortcomings in valuations that were made in various land transactions. And in some cases, transactions that occurred, but the pay didn't happen, and mismanagement of the Pawnee funds. So, as I say, there was a list of issues that were brought in the Pawnee case before the ICC. And I've read about that, I've studied it, but it's been some years since I looked at this. And Walter may know a whole lot more than I do about this. But when I took an Indian law case in the mid class in the mid 80s, this was one of the things that got covered and sort of introduced me to that. And then I did some research in the years that followed, but that was a long time ago. So I'm a little, I hope I haven't gotten things totally messed up here. But you mentioned, Lucille, that the judgment was finalized and the payments were issued to living Pawnees in 1964. So that rings true. And so that's my understanding. I hope I haven't messed it up too much.
Well, all I know is, what my father told us at the time, and he called it a land claim settlement for lands that we lost in Nebraska, and how it was valued at the price the government was paying for the railroad right-of-way. That was part of the calculation of what the land that we lost was valued at. But I'd be interested in how we reconcile that we moved voluntarily from our Aboriginal lands. So how could we make a case to get paid for them? I think that's an interesting question, because the money was real. I finished college on it. It came at a perfect time for me to finish my college education. So anyway, I think we need to go back and look at that too, because there had to be quite a bit of documentation that was required for those. And my understanding, according to my dad, was it was land claims. But maybe he didn't have it right. I don't know. But
No, that's correct.
he followed it. I know that.
That is a correct way to see it. But for example, looking at the sale of lands through the Treaty of 1833, I think that was one of the causes of action. The argument was made that the Pawnees received not a fair valuation for the amount of land that was sold in the course of that treaty. And so looking closely at that treaty and looking at the transaction that occurred and then determining that, okay, instead, and I forget what the amounts were, if it was 50 cents an acre, but it was worth $1. Then the math was done. It should have been paid $1 per acre then, and only 50 cents. So what does that add up to today over all these years? Here's the amount we can come up with. That is the amount that would be a fair compensation for what was ultimately an unfair valuation. So that's just an example of the kind of analysis that was done. So it was never an issue of we want to get land back. I think the Pawnees would have preferred that, but that was not allowed in the ICC. Again, I hope I'm not butchering that history too much.
Well, if it had to do with land that was ceded in a treaty, 1831, is that what you said? That would have been a long time before, the visitation to Indian Territory to, for us to remove ourselves voluntarily. So that might explain it, is the timing in history. I don't know, but very interesting.
Kelly, I have a quick question. In your talk, you talked about a bunch of Pawnees popping up out of the grass on a buffalo hunt. I was confused because I thought you were talking about a meeting that was going on in Oklahoma or in Indian Territory, but where did that happen?
Sorry, I was giving an illustration of the kind of man that Pawnee Bob was. Pawnee Bob was the interpreter for Big Spotted Horse and Roan Chief in 1874. So I wanted to know who he was. Was he Pawnee? Was he white? And so I found this story about him. So I was just sharing the story about Pawnee Bob to give you an idea of
who he was. It was a story that wasn't happening in one of these meetings.
No.
Oh,
no.
Where do you know where that happened?
It actually happened in Kansas. Well, I found it on the Kansas historical website. The Plains, what was it called? The Plains of Kansas or something. And so it had the story of Jim Kenyon, his friends, and Pawnee Bob, and meeting the Pawnee hunting party on the plains.
Okay. Yeah, I think the buffalo herds, things like that were also contributing factors. I think there was a lot of things that were going on in a big picture that were also factored into a decision to remove from Nebraska, and the changes in the ability to live the lifeways that had been living were eroding for a lot of big picture social reasons. So it's been my opinion that the Pawnee leadership did make some self-determination type decisions, but within a context of a real pressure cooker and some really difficult, tragic times. I think if you even just look at population counts and see through this time period what happened to the Pawnee Nation's population count, it was collapsing. So there were reasons behind why that was happening. So there's a lot to, it would be interesting to have a discussion and lay down, both sides. What are some of the tragic conditions that were going on, and what were some of the self-determination type responses that were going on, and maybe flesh this out a little further. So it might be a good topic sometime.
Yeah, there was a lot going on. And in reading, the minutes and the talks, I was surprised that the buffalo wasn't brought up more often. It was brought up once as kind of a side thought, but the encroachment of the white settler was brought up by far more often than the buffalo or the diseases or everything else that was happening at the time.
Yeah, my understanding is I'm not aware of any buffalo hunt in that time frame that went on in Oklahoma. There was just no herd for it, as far as I
Right.
understood.
Yeah. Well, supposedly this happened in Kansas, and I
Yeah.
found this story about Pawnee Bob yesterday, so I didn't have time to verify it, but it was a good story, so I threw it in
was a
there.
good story. Well, are there other questions or comments, feedback? Kelly's open for all that.
I had a quick question for when Roger was talking about this Richard Pratt. I've been trying to take notes all evening, but he said someone was murdered in Kansas. Was that Frank West, Big Spotted Horse, or Richard Pratt?
That was Big Spotted Horse.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I
so
didn't know
our
how he
family,
died.
he disappeared and we never heard from him again. I think Roger knew this before I did, but I recently found where he was killed and where he's buried. So
Okay, so he was murdered by who?
by the sheriff
Oh,
of Caldwell City, Kansas.
okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Say something?
Yes, Howard, go ahead.
What I read about this removal or movement for our people, I think it was, to me, what little bit I know about this was predicated upon Massacre Canyon. And the Massacre Canyon was really a massacre because our chiefs, Sky Chief in particular, discounted the reports that there was a many Sioux, and told them they were girls, women, and we're going to go hunt. And as a result, we know the result. But it would seem to me, if I was living at that time and our chiefs led us into a massacre, then yeah, I think what we're talking about here, Spotted Horse Chief decided the only way he was going to be able to make it was to get it to go to the hot place. So that's my 2 bits. Over and out. This is a new phone. I got to figure out how to make this stop. Okay.
Thank you, Howard.
Yeah, sign me off. Mute me.
All right. Anyone else? We're a bit past time.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. A lot of content and well worth hearing. Some people that needed to go left, but if there's any last comments from anyone, now is the moment.
I apologize for my irreverent clapping earlier, but I found it very interesting and engaging, and I just wanted to applaud my mom because I know she put a lot of time and effort into this, and and sometimes even though I love history can be a little dry, but I thought she did a really good job. And I just wanted to say good job, Mom.
Aw, thank you. Thank you for being here too. Thanks. That means a lot.
Well, Kelly, that's quite a compliment.
It is. I love my kids. And thank you for letting me do this. I said it before, but there's really no end to research. You can look and look and look, and you always find something more. There's always one more rabbit hole to go down. But when there's a deadline, it's like, okay, this is what I know at this particular point. So I appreciate being able to present this because I have to organize all my thoughts and get it all down. And it really helps me digest everything that I've read the last 3 months.
Well,
thank
you're going to have to write a book.
I'm working on it. I think I know where to start now.
Mhm.
So
We know how to get you some deep history background and some good maps to go into it.
oh, I would love that. Yeah, some authentic Pawnee maps. That would be fantastic. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Don't go away just because I turn off the recording. But thank you again, Kelly.
Thanks, Kelly.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Roger, for adding everything that you do. Appreciate it.